guaranteed education, healthcare, the right to vote. None of that is currently in our Constitution. So we could have a Constitution that includes and codifies the rights of nature, the rights of the earth, the rights of individuals, the rights of all people, the rights of children. And so early on with Move to Amend, a number of us, not everybody in the leadership, but most of us, over half of us, were really excited about the concept of broadening thinking about a 28th Amendment. And parallel, there's some folks in our, who I would think of as our allies or partners. They're not so much maybe now because we've alienated them maybe. But at the time, some of those guys, and they were mostly guys, older white men, lawyers and whatnot, were excited about having an Article 5 convention. Do y'all know what I mean when I say that? Okay, cool. I'm glad you don't know what it means. It's a good sign. An Article 5 convention is when the people in the country say, and it is in our Constitution, it's Article 5, when the people in the country say, this isn't working anymore, we want a constitutional convention. Have you heard of a constitutional convention? Liberals and progressives are very nervous about a constitutional convention because they think, because it means coming together and either having a new constitution or taking something out in a radical way. And many progressive people have a fear that super right-wing people will do something horrible in the Constitution. I've never had a fear of it because I wasn't that happy about it to start with. So I didn't think it could get worse. And I knew that if we did our work as organizers and activists, if we build relationships to the point where we honor all the voices in the room, you know, like y'all are talking about, then we'll be fine. There won't be any takeover by the right wing because none of us are going to want that. We're going to want guaranteed clean water, guaranteed jobs and health care and good conditions for workers. And in my mind, I mean, everybody wants the best for themselves and people like them. Well, if we get to the point where we know we're all ourselves, then it's cool. We're not going to want anybody to suffer. So we have almost 400,000 folks who have signed on to say, yay, we want to overturn Citizens United. But it's more than overturning Citizens United at this point. For the last several years, since 2010 when we started operating, we got together in 2009 because we knew the ruling was coming, but the ruling was in January of 2010, so we didn't officially launch until about then. And we've done 2 or 3 rounds of our movement education program, which is a requirement for our affiliate members. So about 50 chapters or affiliates, whatever you call it, around the country have participated. And some states have 2 or 3 affiliates, some states don't have any. And the movement education program is to build the skills so that we can organize effectively in any community and build the kind of consent so that people will be down for at least the 28th Amendment, at most a new constitution. And it means for us, most of the people who have raised their hand and said, I'm interested in Move to Amend, are college-educated, middle-class, and older white folks. So our movement education has been about how do you build movements. There's a lot of anti-oppression work in there, dealing with race and gender and class and sexual identity and religion. So for some folks it's a challenge, but it's been fun, and I think it's been fun. I don't know if everybody would say that. And it's gotten us, I think, to a place where we're able to look at the next step of having people's movement assemblies in a lot of places, a model that's come out of the World Social Forum model, where you gather with a issue in mind, but not an answer. Have y'all ever been to a people's movement assembly? So it's very cool. So you come together and you generate ideas, and then you generate consensus or consent about, okay, what are our action plans? What are the next steps? And there are always action plans in the People's Movement Assembly. So we want to have lots of these in different parts of the country with the focus being on what would you want in your Constitution. So we have people start thinking about it and building the power to make it happen, both working on who's currently in office, in mostly congressional and Senate offices, because that's where you can have, well, this is, again, me speaking, not so much Move to Amend. Because of the way elections happen now, most elected officials are obligated to the people that gave them money, and not to us. And that happens, it gets worse the higher up you go. So president, forget about it. Senate, Congress, maybe you can have an influence on your congressional person. Your person who's your school board, city council, you're probably pretty safe. But we want to get our folks nationally to focus on congressional leaders, because we'll have to be able to pressure the Congress into ratifying whatever we come up with. So that's enough of my talking. This is legalized democracy, and I think the last 10 minutes are what we care about. This is 30 minutes long. We could listen to the first 2 or 3 minutes and see, it's the timeline. That's it, the timeline, yay!
Okay.
Go back to the, and I think the timeline might be in more than one piece, so it might start sooner than that, but I think it's about 10 minutes out. And if we could watch that last 10 minutes, I think that would be awesome. So here's the deal that the timeline talks about. I'll try to give you the introduction so if we watch it, it makes sense to us.
Now, the only thing I'm concerned about is the
Sound.
So if people need to, I'm going to turn it up.
We'll have to
and
huddle.
You might have to huddle a little bit. Yeah.
But let me, after the introduction, we'll pause and I'll introduce the time. Are we just going to do that timeline?
I'm trying to get to.
Right there.
Yeah.
After
okay.
you see maybe there. So here's, and pause, and then I'll try to say what the timeline's about. So, I've never been a fan of history, to say that, to be honest. Part of that is because it hasn't served my highest good. As a black woman who grew up in poverty in North Carolina, history was not a good thing to hear, because it wasn't about the history of liberation. I didn't in the 2nd and 3rd grade hear anything about Ida B. Wells or, who's my favorite? Fannie Lou Hamer. All right, so I didn't even know Fannie Lou Hamer's name until I was 19. So I just avoided history because it would not serve me well. And when I started rolling with folks with Move to Amend, actually before that, I met a couple of the co-founders in '95. Lawyers, intellectuals, writers, nothing wrong with any of that. But they often talked about history. And I just didn't care. I didn't want to hear anything about it. Because history in this country, from my perspective, not so great. It wasn't until I started having occasional coffees with a tiny little skinny white man called Howard Zinn that I paid attention to history. So after a few years of knowing him, I was like, okay, fine, I'll read something. So, really, reluctantly, yeah. So, one of the things, though, about when I started really paying attention to the Constitution, and I intuitively knew this wasn't great for people of color or women or poor people. I hadn't dissected it so much, and I learned about the U.S. versus Vallejo, which is a decision, I think, in 1978 that said money is speech. I lost my mind. I learned that in the 80s, and as a person from poverty, the concept that someone who had more money had more of a right to be heard than me, enraged is not enough of a word to describe what it does to me when I even think about it now. So when we look at what happened with the Constitution, and the other thing I was resistant to many, many years, and up till recently, I acquiesced to say, okay, maybe this is true. The concept that there was an intentional exclusion of voices from our process. Not just that it, it just kind of happened, because it kind of happened, but the concept that they were like, no, we will not let these people have part of our democracy process. And that turns out to be pretty accurate. So when you look at this timeline documents all of the times when the people push back, because the Bill of Rights is the people's attempt to be part of the Constitution, to force ourselves into the law of the land. Women got pushed in with the 19th Amendment. Black men were freed by the 13th Amendment, which is the same thing corporations use to say they're people. So this timeline shows us that even when we push back to get those wins in the Bill of Rights, the courts every time would find a way to give more power to corporations, all the way back to like 18-something.
Yeah.
We'll see in the timeline.
It's like 30-some years after the Constitution.
Yeah, it does. And we'll see if the sound works. Do you have a question?
I have a comment. You ever look at the word corporation and corpse? I mean, it's eerie, but
It's
it's
called,
true.
it's one of the first things you learn in law school, and I don't even know this by hanging out with the people I do, is that a corporation is a legal fiction.
Mhm.
So, yeah, but it's still a person.
Still
Yeah,
body.
but-
Yeah, we can't,
It's a body.
yeah, it's a body.
Yeah, but we have social security numbers that are our corporation to somebody, and I looked at that word really deep, and I was just like,
It's
oh.
creepy.